Awesome sauce. I hope everyone is doing well. Today is June 20th, and hope you guys are maybe, depending on if your job, well, not if your job recognized it, but if your job was executing the federal holiday of Juneteenth. But we're glad that you guys are hanging out with us today for about an hour. And we're going to get into this presentation here in just a moment. But of course, you guys know, as you come on into the chat, just go ahead and drop your city in the chat. Drop your city in the chat and let us know that you are here, that you're hanging out with us. Let us know what city you are representing with us. Let us know what city, where you are. For us here, it's right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. We're in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and we're at the Streaming Suites here, which is actually a new event center, broadcast center, content creation studio for content creators, primarily faith-based content creators or professional development, L&D content creation. And so we're excited that you guys are hanging out with us today for this hour. We've got 1 hour, 1 hour of power, 1 hour of insight, 1 hour of principle and strategy. And we'll be talking, for those of you who were able to see it, you saw that our focus today is nightmares into empires. Nightmares into empires. So if you can drop that in the chat for us, nightmares into empires, we would appreciate that. Let people know what we're talking about. I'm going to go ahead and get this shared over on our other page. So by all means, those of you guys who are coming in with us, if you feel as if this content that we'll be sharing is going to be impactful and transformative, go ahead and share this video. Share it, with your colleagues, with your friends, with your peers, etc. And we feel as if it's going to add tremendous value. That's what we believe, and that's what we expect. So as you're coming in, go ahead and drop your city and your state in the chat. Let us know where you are, where you're watching us from. Awesome. And it looks like here the battery in this microphone is possibly going out. We've been doing a whole lot of recording over the past couple days. So if it does go out, just an FYI, it will only be about maybe 30 seconds or so for me to switch this mic out here. So, but we'll go ahead and we'll see what happens. Okay. All right. We're talking about nightmares into empires, and we're here on Juneteenth, and I'm waiting for this to pop up here so I can go ahead and do it. There it is. Thank you very much. Share it, with your and we're going to hit share. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump on in. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to jump on in. It's Marcus Benjamin here, and we're talking about turning nightmares into empires. And this is our Juneteenth conversation. And this Juneteenth conversation, we've been having this conversation for about 4 years now, specifically sometimes we do it on the day, which is, which would have been yesterday, Sunday, the 19th of June. But today, since this is the official commemoration day, official national holiday, then we opted and decided to do this today. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into our content for today. And I feel as if it's going to be insightful. So again, go ahead and tag this, share this with your colleagues, etc., and drop your city and your state in the chat. All right. So when we talk about turning nightmares into empires, let's begin by jumping backward, and then we're going to go forward. Okay. Now, when I say jumping backward, let me begin by being very clear. Let me be very clear. There are a lot of people, especially over the past several weeks, who have been listening to some of my commentary, some of my insights, some of my perspective, and they have felt as if, and most of these, not 100% of the people who made the comment that I'm getting ready to make were white Christians. Now understand, for those of us who are washed in the blood, we've received Jesus as Savior, then whether you are white, black, Asian, Hispanic, whatever, we are all a part of the body, even if we disagree on several things. For those of you who are not within the Christian faith, we are still participating in the brotherhood of humanity in that sense, because we all share a common ancestor. We may have different cultures, different cultural expressions, different nationalities, different languages, etc., but we are all human. We were all created in God's image and after God's likeness, and we are all human. So with that being said, the comment that I would get is, Marcus, why don't we stop talking about race and racism, and why don't we just move forward? Like, why don't we just move forward? Let's just go forward. And I tell people all the time, especially, again, our white Christian brothers and sisters who make this comment to me on a regular basis. I tell them, number one, we would never tell that to a Jew. I have never, ever heard anyone tell a Jewish person, let's just stop talking about the Holocaust. Let's just stop talking about what happened. Let's just, put your history and your experience in Germany and your experience as a cultural group, let's just put that experience on the shelf. And let's just stop talking about it. Let's not bring it up. I mean, Germans who weren't even alive during that time, many of them are feeling guilty, so on and so forth. That conversation never happens. But it's just surprising that when it comes to the Black and the African experience in America, that other groups want Black people to stop talking about our unique, distinct, and toxic, evil history that we had in America. That let's just stop talking about it. Well, that's my first argument. That if that is true for Black people in America, then start saying that to our Jewish brothers and sisters regarding the Holocaust. They're not going to do that. Number two, my second argument to that statement is this. Until an infraction or an offense is rectified, there is no forward progress. People think that the Civil Rights Act, quote unquote, rectified a few hundred years of chattel slavery and about 100 years of Jim Crow. We think that a civil rights bill just ended all of that and rectified all of that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that that's not accurate. Number one, because the civil rights bill, as good as it was still, or it still fell short in so many areas and so many ways. Number two, even that civil rights bill had a lot of many other caveats for other groups of people. So it wasn't a document or a piece of legislation that was specifically for Black people based upon the unique experience that Black people had in America. So it was a little bit of Black people and a whole lot of other groups. Now, I'm not contending with any other group who got anything put into that bill. I'm just simply making a point that it wasn't a bill to rectify the issues that Black people experienced during Jim Crow and through a couple hundred years of chattel slavery. So those are my first two arguments. Number one, we don't tell that the Jewish people regarding the Holocaust. Number two, the Civil Rights Bill itself was not a rectifying or a restitution for the infractions of nearly 100 years of Jim Crow and for chattel slavery. It was simply a piece of legislation that included a lot of other cultural groups that, quote unquote, call society to be socially equal, right? But social equality and economic opportunity are not the same thing, of which I will discuss in detail. Social inequality and economic empowerment and economic restitution and economic equality, those are not the same thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So I hope that provides some perspective. And let me give you my third reason. My third reason why we need to have this conversation is because rectification or restitution or redemption, recompense, reparations, whatever the term people want to use, that means there's a specific decision made that seeks to rectify the advantage that was created by the infraction. So if someone broke into our office here right outside of Charlotte, if someone broke in and if they destroyed the windows and if they, destroyed the walls, came into this studio and, took all of the equipment, the videos, the cameras, the lights, the televisions, the flooring, the staging, all of the tens of thousands of dollars we invested into the studio. They just took everything, right? And we filed a police report. Couldn't find them, right? Let's say just couldn't find them for 3 years or whatever the case may be. And let's say, for instance, that person has a consequence of conscience. And that person says, you know what, Marcus, I came, I'm the guy who broke into your building. I'm the guy who stole all of your equipment. I'm the guy who took all of your stuff and destroyed your office. I'm the guy that did that, and I want to apologize to you. Will you accept my apology? Well, certainly I accept your apology. So can we move forward? Can we put this behind us? We cannot move forward, and we cannot put this behind us just because you apologize. Well, wait a minute, Marcus. I said I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize sincerely for what I did to you and to your company. Let's move forward. Number one, because you committed the infraction, it's not your job to tell me when to move forward. I determine when I move forward because I'm the one that has been violated. Number two, you stole tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Where is the equipment? If you don't have the equipment, where is the money that you're going to pay to give restitution for the infraction? It cost me another $12,000 to $20,000 to fix the office, replace the doors and the glasses. And then I had to spend another $40,000, $50,000 on equipment to get all of my equipment back in. And then I lost time because it took us 2 months to do that. And I lost the 60 days that it took us to get it done. I lost all the equipment costs. I lost all of the costs. So are you planning to give restitution for what you stole? Well, no, Marcus, I just want to move forward. You see, that's the conversation that has been happening in America since 1865. Is that when we're talking about legitimately what transpired in this company that provided significant, quantifiable economic advantage to our European brothers and sisters in this country through the exploitation and through the system of, in some instances, elimination of black people, terrorism, as it were, it produced billions of dollars in economic value for people, for white people in general, and then for this country in particular. That our country could not have risen from where it was in 1776 to being a global power competing with Great Britain and Portugal and Spain, etc., within a couple hundred years, when these countries were in existence for several hundred years, 600, 700, 800 years, and yet within 200 years, 250 years, America is able to compete globally, economically. How did that happen? It happened on the backs of millions of Africans. Because whether it was tobacco, whether it was cotton, whether it was textiles, whether it was our system of accounting and banking, whether it was financial, the Industrial Revolution was fueled by the cotton plantation complex in the South, the manufacturing facilities of the North, and the banking houses in Europe and in Great Britain. That's how the Industrial Revolution happened. That powered the world, primarily European countries, into this age of tremendous capitalism and growth. But none of that would be possible if it weren't for the African in the South. See, that's economic equality. That's economic inequality, excuse me. So I'm making this clear because I want us to understand that slavery, the system of slavery, of which black people were not slaves, we were enslaved, our ancestors were enslaved, that system that existed in this country, there are just numerous scholarly books, Dr. Edward Baptist, The Half Has Never Been Told, and so many others that deal with the financial accounting of what transpired from 1776 to 1865, and then from 1875 to 1964. And the research and the data is irrefutable about how powerful the wealthiest people in the South enslaved Africans. Did you hear what I said? The wealthiest people in the South enslaved Africans. The wealthiest people in the North profited from the enslavement of Africans through manufacturing goods and services that were only possible because of the enslavement of Africans. Why is this important? Because that gives you the third plank to my argument. Until restitution happens, There is no forward progress. Just like with the gentleman coming in saying, I apologize to you for destroying your facility and stealing your stuff. I mean, I sincerely apologetic. I'm apologizing to you. Forgive me. Let's move forward. No, we cannot move forward in relationship until you make restitution for my damages. Everybody knows that in a legal situation. But in this situation, it seems as if we want to just, let's not apply that principle here. Let's not apply that to Africans and African citizens who became citizens in the 20th century. Let's not apply that there. So we have to understand that our fight and our clarity in this conversation, just from an economic standpoint, is a valid conversation. Did you hear me? It's a valid conversation. And because it's a valid conversation, it is our responsibility to not let anybody pressure us or bully us into stop having this conversation. And then for those of us who are believers, who are Christians, who follow the scriptures, it's even more important for us because many of these slave owners in the South use the Bible that we love and cherish as the word of God to promulgate this system of enslavement. So guess who should be leading in this conversation about restitution, recompense, and forward progress? It should be the body of Christ, those who consider themselves to be Christians and following the scriptures. We should be the one having this conversation and then having it from an intellectual and an intelligent vantage point to realize that there are things that transpired in this country that gave our European brothers and sisters several hundred years of economic and social advantage. And in turn, at the same time, exploiting Africans to capitalize off of their labor. So as a result, as a collective group of people, yes, there is specific, measurable, quantifiable reparations that should happen for black people. Now, let me go and jump in on this one real quick. There are people who say, well, no one is alive today who owns slaves. Now, I have to be very, very cautious with my words here because that's really one of the most ignorant things that I've ever heard. It really is. I'm not trying to throw shade or be offensive to any person. I'm just simply saying that just tells you that person isn't thinking. It just tells you very quickly that person isn't thinking. Why is that the case? Because we all know that not one person is alive today who owned slaves. But are their descendants still alive? Are those trusts still being executed? What about all the capital and all the wealth that was transferred? What about all the social capital that was transferred? What about the banks? What about the insurance companies that would not loan blacks money, that would not insure the bodies of black people? What about that? What about the hundreds of years of black people, or let's just say 150 years of African Americans not able to have life insurance to bury their family and creating generational wealth through trusts and estates and life insurance? What about that transfer of wealth and the government that supported this strategy to keep black people impoverished? What about black people who couldn't own homes, who couldn't buy homes in this country for years? For years, qualified, had the money, could not buy homes in this country, while the government at the same time was subsidizing the building of subdivisions all over this country and giving our white brothers and sisters thousands of dollars in equity by subsidizing their loan and guaranteeing these loans to developers all over this country, Levittown and Long Island and New Jersey and Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken, and just hundreds of others all over the country where black people could not own homes and we were not helped by the government. What about all of that equity that transferred from generation to generations through property appreciation? I mean, we could just keep going down the list. And none of this is in any way expressing some type of victim mentality that I've heard some people say. This is just historical fact. This is just the reality of what transpired in this country that gave certain people an advantage and other people a disadvantage. And so when people hear this, it's like, we know, well, there are black people who just want a handout. Well, if that is the case, then what did your ancestors want? Why did your ancestors take the handout? What about the millions of acres of land that was given to Europeans who were coming in and immigrating to this country that was given land out west while black people couldn't even get 40 acres and a mule after emancipation? All I'm endeavoring to say is when we talk about the present state of economics, we cannot divorce the present state from the past state. And just like Germany, I'm not sure what year it was, maybe it was somewhere around 2012-ish, somewhere in there, where Germany just finished paying back the United Nations and paying a form of reparations to Jewish descendants of the Holocaust. Those people weren't alive, but nobody's having that conversation either. So what am I really trying to get us to understand? Number one, we can't understand the present and the future while ignoring the past. Number two, for black people, we will not ignore the past because it is our past. It is our collective history in America. And I'm very aware that there are a handful of African Americans across this country out of the approximately 45 million black people in America. There are, and let's say about 24, 25 million African-American adults in America. I am aware that there are about 500,000 to 1 million African-Americans who don't hold this view. So I am aware that about 3% of black people in America don't hold this view. But roughly 97% of black people in America hold this position. And by this position, I don't just mean the words I'm choosing. I mean that they understand that there's a historical context to racism, there's a present context to racism, and unless the history and the present are properly dealt with, interpreted, and rectified, we can't have a glorious future in America. Even McKinsey and Company, you can go pull it up. I think it's 2018 and 2020, McKinsey State of the Economy. They talk about how America is losing about $1.5 trillion of GDP every year, of gross domestic product, by not dealing with and dismantling the system of institutional racism in America. Did you hear me? That we're losing about almost $2 trillion a year in gross domestic product, which is the economic output of a country. That we're losing that by not dismantling the system of inequality and systemic racism in America. They indicated that the wealth gap in 2020 was the job pay gap was about $220 billion. That when you compared white Americans who had similar degrees and experience to black Americans, so similar, not some wide variety of jobs. One person's a CEO and the other person is a bus driver. No, we're talking about people who had similar occupations, similar degrees, similar years of experience. And there's still a $220 billion wealth gap. Income gap, wage gap between black and white Americans. Again, you can pull this research up on your own. So I want us to grasp this dynamic because as I'm talking about the nightmare becoming an empire or nightmares to empires, you and I have to understand as black people that our ancestors experienced a nightmare. Our ancestors experienced a nightmare on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. And because our ancestors experienced this nightmare, let's talk a little bit about what that nightmare looked like. If I'm helping you, if I'm inspiring you, if I'm challenging you, drop a number 5 in the chat. If this is completely irrelevant to you, just log off. Or you could drop a 0 in the chat. I'm endeavoring to provide some context to this conversation. So what are the types of nightmares that our ancestors experienced? The first type of nightmare was fear of their life, meaning every day they woke up, they lived under the fear that their life could end today. That if they did the wrong thing, said the wrong thing, acted the wrong way, looked at the wrong person, didn't pick enough cotton, said the wrong thing to the wrong person, that their life could end. There were so many rules that our ancestors had to know. And if they did not know those rules, then their life was in jeopardy. Number one fear was fear of their life. Number two was fear for their family. That every day our ancestors had a fear for their family, that maybe their husband or their wife or their child would do something wrong and in turn get whipped, get stripped, get beaten, or simply get killed. And then to top it off, another facet of that nightmare within the family context was you have a child and your child is sold. You can't get married unless it's arranged by the slave owner and he agrees to the marriage. So they determine who you loved and who you couldn't within a male-female context. So you had very limited experiences where true love and genuine family was built, because so much of our relationships were fear-driven or arranged for the purpose of procreation and children being sold away. And we know there were families that were intact during the system of slavery. We know that. But remember, the majority didn't have this experience. They had to love each other in secret. They had to even think hard about having children because they didn't want to lose their child. Because if the child was strong, if the child showed promise, if the child was especially a male, he was of worth more economic value because he could work more. So the first nightmare was the fear of their life. The second nightmare was fear of their family. That man, not being able to love and give yourself passionately and energetically and purposefully to a husband or a wife. Nightmare. Number three, third nightmare, which is where I want to stop, is the nightmare of no economic significance and no economic security. That every day when our ancestors woke up, every day when our ancestors did what they did, every day, guess what it was? I don't own anything. I don't have anything. Nothing is mine. No dreams can be executed. No purposes can be executed. No desires can be executed because my life is really not mine. My life belongs to this person who's trained me to call them master. When we only have one master in heaven. The Bible says specifically we only have one master in heaven. But we were trained, our ancestors were trained to live under the nightmare of calling another human their master. And that other human owned them. That other human could sell them and make money off of them. That other human could collateralize them with their bank and get a loan based upon the economic value of one of our ancestors. And so as a result of this, you had fear of life, fear of family, and then you had fear of economic survival. These three conditions, and of course there could be several others, I'm just simply zeroing in on those. These three conditions created a nightmare of an experience. A nightmare of an experience. I mean, difficult experience. I mean, just think about it. I mean, think about a person waking up in prison every day. Outside of just the overall culture of the prison that in many instances is a toxic culture. They get 3 meals a day. They go outside and exercise and, hang out or whatever that scenario may be, etc. They're having some type of a job. They're making license plates, as the movies, would express. They're doing something, a menial, manual task, right? And that's going to be their lot for the next X number of years. Their life is not their own because of a crime that they committed or a crime they were punished for that they didn't commit. But my point is this. Within a prison context, that person may be in fear of their life, depending on the type of prison and the culture that is there. That person may have a fear for their family. How is their family being provided for? How is their family being taken care of? What's the status of their family without their presence, et cetera, et cetera? And then thirdly, no economic security at all. I mean, you own nothing. I mean, you got a number on your chest. You're provided a uniform. I mean, you own nothing. You become literally a property of the government. I think there's a movie on Netflix called The 13th Amendment or 13 or something like that. I know my wife and my daughter saw it. If they're watching on this, they can drop that in the chat. I just couldn't watch it at the time they were watching it because of, just my own mental health at that time. But it basically talked about how the prison industrial complex, the prison system, the jail system was created outside of or right on the back side of the system of enslavement in order to what? Pull slaves right back into somebody else's property. Where how many black men were locked up in jail and sent to quote unquote work camps because of what was called vagrancy, not having a job, standing around, loitering, etc. These were all terms created to arrest black people in America to get them back becoming someone else's property. So when you commit a crime and you go to jail or prison, during that time, you are the property of the government of the United States. And unfortunately, from about 1870 all the way up into around the late 1940s, black people were being arrested and put in prison and work camps across this country for doing nothing. If you winked at a white woman, or if they thought you winked at a white woman, or if they thought you whistled at a white woman, or was trying to seduce a white woman, Emmett Till, I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna go there today because that would take me off and that would make me upset. But black men arrested, put in jail, put in work camps, and then the government or the city or the county would in turn hire those people out to corporations in America. And so the corporations would pay the government money to have its prisoners work for that company. So the company is making money, the city, county, or town is making money. No economics for that person. As a matter of fact, there are literally burial sites across this country where tens and hundreds of black men were simply worked themselves to death while prisoners or incarcerated by the city or town, but hired to work for a company, and they weren't even buried. Literally, they just had dirt pushed over them. What about their families? What about their livelihood? What about their sense of purpose and dignity? Why am I bringing these stories up? I'm not talking about a handful of stories, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a handful of people, like 50 people. You can do the research on this. White Americans and black Americans, you can do the research on this and see about these work camps that literally were sitting beside governments, waiting for the government, the local government, to arrest black people so they can immediately create a bartering and a business exchange to get those black people working for them. And they basically became the property of the government. And many of them, we never heard from them again. Never heard from them again. And this is not in the 1700s or the 1800s or the 1900s. Well, 19th century. This is the 20th century. This is 1925, 1918, 1935, 1946, where this was happening in various places, especially in the Deep South, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, etc. All right. So with all of that being said, my time is moving forward. If I'm helping you, if this is insightful, if it's inspirational, if it's educating you, then drop a 5 in the chat. Drop a 5 in the chat and let me know what's going on. All right. So moving forward. Now let's talk about why we need to turn the nightmare into an empire. Because if we understand what our ancestors experienced as a daily nightmare, then we have an incentive that other people do not have to build empires. Empires of personal well-being, empires of family well-being and strength, and empires of economic well-being. So for the 3 areas of the nightmare, the 3 fears that hung over their head every day, fear of their life, fear of family, fear for their family, and then fear of their economic survival. We need to then contrast those nightmares with 3 empires: a personal empire of well-being and emotional health. Number 2, a family empire of husband and wife building an amazing family together. And number 3, economic empires, ecosystems, professional aspirations and accomplishment, businesses, entrepreneurial endeavors, nonprofit corporations, etc. So let's talk about the first one. As my time is moving. The first empire that we have to build, the first empire is the empire to contrast the nightmare, and it is the empire of personal dignity, personal identity, and value. So where does that come from? Where does your personal sense of dignity and value come from? Does it come just because of our melanin skin? Does it come because of our kinky hair? Does it come because of our athletic build in most cases, or our shape, or our physique, or whatever? Where does your sense of dignity and worth come from primarily? Ladies and gentlemen, I believe our dignity and worth primarily should come from the fact that we are made in God's image and in God's likeness. That we have been made out of the same stuff that God is made out of. When he said, I created you in my image and after my likeness, that our sense of dignity and identity and value should come first and foremost because God created us on purpose. We're not here by accident. We're not here we're not here without purpose. We're not the byproduct of random mutational chances over 6.5 or 5.5 billion years. No, we are here intentionally on purpose. God created us and we are distinct from every other living thing. Our sense of personal dignity and value should come from God. Something unchangeable, something non-fungible, if I can use that term. Something that should be non-negotiable, right? That God's perspective about us never changes. He says the hairs upon your head are numbered. He said, just as there are an innumerable number of pieces of sand on the seashore, that's how many thoughts I have about you. And those thoughts are wonderful. That an innumerable number of wonderful thoughts God has about you. And no matter how many people say they love you, they value, they appreciate you, you're amazing, nobody has an innumerable number of wonderful thoughts about you. Not even you. You don't even have that for yourself. So you know no one else has it. But God says, I have an innumerable number of wonderful thoughts about you. Man, that's amazing. So number one, how do we turn the nightmare of our lives, being fearful of our lives, is to in turn establish an unchangeable point of reference for our sense of dignity and worth. Our dignity and worth doesn't come by our sexuality. Our dignity and worth doesn't come by our gender. Our dignity and worth doesn't come by our skin pigmentation and our culture. All of those things are beneficial, valuable, and created by God. But that's not where our value comes from. Our value comes first and foremost because we were created spiritually, that we have a spiritual nature that's beyond physical, and that spiritual nature is made in the image of God. Number one. Number two, when it comes to exchanging or turning the nightmare into an empire, is the empire of family. Remember, we mentioned the fear of the family. I mean, I can't marry because, or I don't want to marry because, I don't want to have children because the children could be sold. The children are going to have a horrible life being under this system of enslavement. My husband could be sold tomorrow because he's a great producer of cotton or tobacco or sugar or rice or whatever it is. Or my wife could be sold, or she could be recruited to be the mistress for the slave master. If she's attractive and beautiful, or if she's a hard worker, then she'll be mated with somebody, not someone that she loves, but mated by the slave master because, the European wanted to have more children that would be a byproduct of that union. And so the relational nightmare that our ancestors experienced should be translated into an empire of family. An empire of black men loving black women, an empire of black women loving black men. Now, let me be very specific. I'm not going to go here and say black women shouldn't marry white men or Asian men, or, black men shouldn't marry, white women or Hispanic. I mean, I can't follow that track with the Bible being the primary book that guides my life. Does that make sense? Because we're all created in God's image and in God's likeness. Therefore, we are all equally candidates to fall in love with someone who doesn't share our skin pigmentation or melanin. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But when I'm speaking culturally about black people, it is in our best interest, culturally speaking, to marry a black man and a black woman, a black female and a black male. Because culturally speaking, our population is declining. That the Hispanic population is growing exponentially. The Asian population is growing exponentially. By most numbers, the white population, European population, is declining as well. What is my point? We're still hovering around 44 million people in America. I'm not going to go through the data right now, but there should be, listen to me, there should be approximately 72 to 100 million black people in America if our birth rate stayed consistent with what it was in 1900. Did you hear me? If you look at the birth rate of Africans after emancipation, going up to 1900, the turn of the century, if we continued on that birth rate trajectory, our population in America would be around between 72 to 100 million people. And we're only 44 million people. You see, we haven't turned that nightmare into an empire. Imagine an additional 35 to 50 million African Americans in this country. Doctors, lawyers, scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, nurses, teachers, professionals, administrators, and the list could go on and on and on and on and on. Imagine if we would turn that nightmare of family into an empire of family. Not going around singing, and I'm not going to get into the cultural conversation regarding, again, black men and white women and so on. I'm not going to get into that conversation today. That's for somebody else to talk about. I'm talking about from a biblical, social standpoint. Biblically speaking, you can marry any other person that you fall in love with who is of the opposite sex. Biblically speaking. Did you hear me? You can marry any other person you want to, biblically speaking, as long as they're of the opposite sex. So if you're a male, biblically, you can marry whoever you want to marry, as long as it's female. And a female, you can marry whoever you want to marry, as long as it's a male. That's God's prescription. Socially is what I'm talking about as it relates to the black position of turning the nightmare family into the empire family. Then our inclination should be to marry someone who looks like us and shares our culture and shares our common drive. Now, can you find that in someone of the opposite sex who is not of your culture? Of course you can. Is it as common? Of course not. So I'm simply making a point that because we haven't handled this nightmare correctly for so many reasons, of which I won't get into, we've got to turn that nightmare of family into an empire family. Where when you look back at some of the golden era of the black community, whether it was, somewhere between the 1920s up to the late 1950s, 50s, early 1960s, where the marriage rate was like at 80%, 85%. Did you hear me? And now it's almost the opposite. It's like almost the opposite, where you've got literally among black eligible, age quantifiable black people who should be married, that it's almost the opposite. It's like 35, 37% somewhere in there. That is roughly around 60 something percent of black people who are at a marriageable age who are not married. We've got to change that nightmare into an empire, ladies and gentlemen. We've got to raise our children. Come on, we've got to raise our children to get married and love being married. We have to groom them for marriage. Did you hear me? We're not grooming our girls to be independent and self-sufficient. No, we're grooming our girls to be interdependent, realizing that having a male counterpart as a spouse is an amazing upgrade to your life. You're amazing by yourself, but having a male husband, a black male husband, is an amazing upgrade to your life. And the same thing is true on the male side. You can be amazing by yourself, but you can be even more amazing marrying a black female and having a tremendous black family. We can change that empire, that nightmare, that our ancestors experienced into an empire. That we can build amazing families that can contribute to the value and the veracity of American culture. That we're not trying to be isolated from the culture. No, black marriages, just like white marriages, just like Asian marriages, just like Hispanic marriages, and so forth, add to the tapestry and the significance of America. And I'm simply saying that we need to do the same, because our marriage rates are among the lowest of the major ethnic groups in America. And we need to change that nightmare into an empire. Now, I know that was somewhat maybe controversial or maybe even difficult And maybe I didn't even explain that as fully or as clearly as I needed to, but I just want us to understand that when we're speaking within an African American context, just in specifically talking about black people, our ancestors did not have the fullest opportunity to experience tremendous love in relationships and tremendous families and relationships because of the nightmares that they experience on a day-to-day basis because of the system of enslavement that they operated under. And now we get to number 3, and that's economic security. Our ancestors experienced the nightmare of economic insecurity. No sense of purpose, destiny, no sense of entrepreneurship, no sense of let me build this, let me own this, let me profit from this, let me pass on wealth and so forth. Our ancestors overwhelmingly didn't have that opportunity. Now we know that when you get around the 1940s and 50s, more black people had the opportunity and access to certain of these things. And we have some tremendous stories. We got Tulsa, Oklahoma. We have, Detroit. We've got Chicago. We have Harlem. I mean, we've got these great examples of back in, again, between the 1930s and the early 1960s, just these tremendous black communities where there was economic ecosystems. But unfortunately, those were the exception and not the norm, because most blacks were still concentrated in agricultural environments in the South and in the Midwest. We were still concentrated in rural context, which means it was farming, it was agriculture. And if we didn't own land, if you didn't own cattle and horses and tools and grain, does that make sense? Then you could not build wealth. So we celebrate Tulsa, we celebrate, Chicago and Detroit and Harlem and the experiences and things that happened during those Renaissance ages in black culture. I'm simply saying that most of black people still experience an economic nightmare. And we have to change that. We have to shift from an economic nightmare to an economic empire. And how do we shift from an economic nightmare to an economic empire? It begins with number 1, becoming the most skilled and competent person at whatever you choose to do for a profession. Listen, if I'm helping somebody, drop a 5 in the chat. I think that's a very powerful statement right there. Listen to me. Listen to what I'm saying. Becoming the most skilled person. Becoming the most skilled person that you can become in the profession that you choose. Becoming the most skilled person. So whatever your profession is, you could be a janitor, become the most skilled janitor. You can be a pediatrician, become the most skilled pediatrician. A lawyer, the most skilled lawyer. A scientist, an academic. Whatever, a lawyer, doctor, preacher, teacher, business owner, CEO, tech founder, nurse, school teacher, whatever you're deciding to do as a profession, becoming the most skilled person you can become in that profession. Whatever that is. So it begins by you taking ownership to your skill and ability. That's what it begins by you. I'm taking ownership to become the most competent person in this particular skill. Number 2, after you make that decision and as you are walking out that decision, then you're to be connected to ecosystems of other professionals who are doing the same thing. So whatever your profession is, you need to get heavily involved in the association of those professionals, whether it's the Lawyers Association, the Doctors Association, the School Teachers Association, the Accountants Association, the Janitors Association, the CEO. Does that make it? Whatever you're doing, get involved with the macro association, the National Association, and then get involved with an African American association. So join the state chamber, join your regional chamber, and then join the black chamber. That's sort of what I'm trying to say. Because if we make this personal commitment to become the best possible person in the specific career that we chose, and then we're joining our national chambers, our ecumenical chambers, our ecumenical associations, and then we are adding value to our African focused chamber or association. You see, now we're building ecosystems of relationships. We're building networks. We're building connections. We're building a web, right? So number 1 is that personal commitment. Number 2, it's ecosystems. And then number 3 is entrepreneurship. Now, listen to me very carefully. My time is almost over. I've got literally 8 minutes. Listen to me. When I say entrepreneurship, I'm not saying you've got to go out here and, and try to become this CEO of a multi-million-dollar company or et cetera, et cetera. By entrepreneurship, I'm just specifically talking about finding a way to leverage your skill and ability to solve a problem that other people will pay you for. Now, you have a job primarily. I know many of you are entrepreneurs, et cetera, so you have a job. But what I'm trying to say is you're creating some passive streams of income because you're able to use the web, use an app, use automation. Life insurance, become a life insurance agent, become a part-time life insurance agent, a part-time realtor, a part-time X, Y, or Z, something that you can get a 1099 for, et cetera, set up an LLC, set up a C Corp. Now that may be more sophisticated for some, but you can still be an independent contractor and be a sole proprietor and make $50,000, $75,000 a year and have that as supplemental income for investing and so on and so forth. But do something entrepreneurial. Something entrepreneurial. I'm not saying become a full-time business owner and quit your job or whatever. If that's your assignment, then that's your assignment. But I'm specifically talking about finding some way to be entrepreneurial. Be a part-time real estate agent. Be a part-time mortgage broker. Be a part-time life insurance agent. Be a part-time X, Y, or Z, something you can do outside of your 9 to 5 to generate additional streams of income so that all of your income isn't dependent upon one source. Does that make sense? You see, we're talking about building these ecosystems. We're talking about building this ecosystem of entrepreneurship and highly skilled people who are in turn changing the economic nightmare that our ancestors experienced into an economic empire. Now, let me give you another one. Somebody say financial literacy. Type it in the chat, hashtag financial literacy. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to learn about money. We've got to learn about stocks, bonds, Bitcoin, crypto, NFTs, Web3, insurance, real estate, flipping. On and on and on. So many different avenues, supply chain management, logistics, general contracting. We've got to be financially literate, meaning we have to know how money works. We have to know what to do with it when we get it, and we have to know how to multiply it. You see, if you don't know how money comes, and if all you think that money comes from is a job, then you're limited. So we have to get financially literate to know so many different ways that money can come to us. Then we have to know how to manage it once we get it. And then thirdly, we've got to know how to what? How to multiply it, how to compound it. So we have to become financially literate people. Now, I'm not implying that we aren't financially literate, because every ethnic group has people who are financially illiterate. But in the context of this conversation, because we're exchanging a nightmare into an empire, it's in our best interest to become financially literate. Let me say it to you a different way as my time begins to wind down. You and I owe our ancestors who lived daily under the tyranny of a system that would not allow them to experience freedom of life, freedom of family, and freedom of finance. Daily, they lived under that system. And here we are today, even though systemic racism still is a real factor, even though racism still is a real factor, ultimately, you and I can't control institutional racism. We can't control systemic injustice. We can't control restitution and reparations. We can't control that. Our politicians have proven to be, unfortunately, many of them, not all of them, but many of them, especially on the national scale, many of them have become inept to addressing the issue of black economic inequality. They become inept in that conversation. And so my point is, we can't control them. I've got about 3 more minutes. We cannot control them. We can advocate, we can lobby, we can rally the troops, we can vote in a certain way, we can be disruptive in our thinking and our patterns. We can do all those things at the national level, but at the end of the day, you can only control your house. Come on, put that in the chat right there. Me. Hashtag ME. At the end of the day, as much as I am involved in local, regional, and national conversations regarding economic empowerment, economic inequality, systemic racism, economic injustice, etc., and I'm going to continue to have that conversation, none of this takes personal responsibility away from black people from doing the things I've shared, among many other things that are out there for them to do. Because at the end of the day, you can only control you. I can only control me. That's it. I can influence other people. I can debate intelligently with other people. I may even, and some people could even run for office to help advocate and become someone who doesn't become compromised by the system. So no matter what happens with those things, at the end of the day, Marcus can only control Marcus. I can only influence the people whose last name is Benjamin. And that's Omika, Isaiah, and Destiny. But they're still adults, so I can't control their decisions, but I can influence them because I'm husband and father. So what I'm saying to you is you can only control your life. So no matter what's happening, did you hear me? No matter what's happening, no matter how many national conversations we have about reparations and economic inequality, diversity, equity, and inclusion, so on and so forth, all those conversations are important and necessary. My phone just dropped. All of those conversations are important and necessary. But none of them we can control. We can't control the outcome of those conversations. We can't control it. But what can you control today? I can control me. I can control if I am walking in personal agency and dignity because God created me in his image and after his likeness. I can control if my decisions overwhelmingly are decisions of dignity as opposed to decisions of fear and compromise. Number two, I can control if I am a marriageable person. Now, I'm already married, thank God, but I'm speaking collectively. You can control if you're a person that is marriage material. You can control that. Because at the end of the day, we all know the kind of person we want to spend the rest of our lives with. We want to spend the rest of our lives with someone who's attractive, who's kind, who's nice, who has character, who is humble, who is assertive and aggressive when need be. You see my point? Some of these basic characteristics, we kind of know. Then become that person. And be actively involved in conversations where relationships can develop. I can't tell you the number of people that we talk to, and it's almost like they're not even thinking about marriage. It's just like they're just, and again, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being single. Don't get me wrong here. But single people can address the wealth gap in America. Do you know who pays, I'm just paying attention to my time here, do you know who pays the most tax in America? Single people. Single people pay more in taxes per capita than any other group in America. So being single, just from a practical standpoint, isn't economically advantageous. I'm just simply making a point that our system is designed to benefit married couples. So I'm just encouraging you to have marriage as a viable option. Does that make sense? Build strong, healthy families. Build strong and raise strong children, right? Be that person that loves, cares, forgives, guides, directs, encourages children to be all that God created them to be. Be that parent. Be that parent. Be that spouse. Be that spouse that encourages, supports, loves, forgives, challenges, encourages, cheers their spouse. Be that woman for your husband. Be that husband for your wife. Be that person. Build an amazing empire family. And as I said, the last one, the economic empire. Become flat out amazing at what you do. Come on, hashtag in the chat, amazing. Yeah. Become flat out amazing at what you do. Connect to ecosystems of other people within your professional domain. And then find something entrepreneurial to do. Again, I'm not saying quit your job or you've got to become this guru entrepreneur. No, I'm simply saying for the typical person, you can make 30 to 50 grand a year in some type of entrepreneurial passive income scenario. You can do that. You can do that and still have your 9 to 5. So listen, ladies and gentlemen, my time is almost over. My time is almost over. I mean, I hope I have said something that was an asset to you. I hope I've said something that was a blessing to you. I really, really, really hope I did. And if I did, if I said something that was an asset and a blessing to you, said, Marcus, you helped me. Just say, Marcus, you helped me. If I did, just let us know in the chat, if you did. If this video you think should be heard and understood by other people, then share this video with family and friends. Share this video with colleagues. And I'm pretty sure there are some things that I said that people are going to disagree with, and that's okay. And I'm pretty sure I could have clarified some things further that maybe could deal with some of that misunderstanding. But there are those of you who are listening to me, who understand me, who know my heart. And then there are others of you who, I don't know this Marcus guy, I just came across this broadcast. And you may hear me say certain